How do we make someone's life change a bit better today? What are we doing today that allows us to be more ourselves? This is really the gold. This is the magic. And it doesn't have to be mystical or something to do with the stars or something. It's just in you. It is what you are. And there's a potential there to just completely become the very being of change, that catalyst.
Welcome to this week's episode. Last year, we sent you a form asking you what you wanted in terms of a community digital space. We have been exploring in the time since ways of weaving the digital and the physical together in meaningful ways that allow for sacred connection. It feels ever more important as we reach the point this week of a year since the first global lockdowns were announced. It's coming together behind the scenes, and I'm excited to share this with you in the coming weeks. In the meantime, if you want to support our work and move closer to the heart of this community, please take a moment to become a patron or a member of Presence. We're at a powerful turning point in the beautiful leadership immersion right now, just entering into one of my favorite modules, Vision, Intuition, and Edgewalking. If you haven't got my book Intuition yet, which is available in the UK, the US, Australia, and Canada, please do head to www.amisha.co.uk and you can find the links to purchase the book from independent bookstores, as well as receive a whole package of gifts, workshops, the extra chapter that I wrote, and more to support you in living a life guided by your intuitive intelligence. We have an Edgewalker here today. My guest is Joseph Tenzin Oliver, a Londoner with a purpose. His career as a social entrepreneur and change agent has taken him around the world and spans subjects from mega city development to artificial intelligence. He specializes in building high-performance teams and communities that create long-term sustainable value that is aligned with nature and harnesses the latest technology. Working behind the scenes to shift society, Joe is the guy that directors of the world's largest companies, investment funds, government departments, and nonprofits contact when they need to navigate the future. His work has impacted millions of people and directly caused hundreds of billions of pounds to be shifted into impact investments. The BBC called him an eco-trailblazer. The Mayor of London assigned him as a London leader, and the British Council named him a leading light. He has spoken for institutions such as TED, the World Economic Forum, and at leading universities such as Stanford, Peking University, and Central St. Martin's. His contemplative experience spans 3 decades of meditation and practice in the energetic arts. During that time, he lived and trained with monks and lineage holders of various traditions and applies these practices on a daily basis. He is currently a mentor at Cambridge University for emerging entrepreneurs, teaches medicine online every Monday for the Hello Beautiful Foundation, and studies Tai Chi each morning. We explore the themes of masculinity, grief, and serial entrepreneurship in this conversation called Catalysts for Wholehearted Change. We contemplate the question, how can we learn to live from the heart and rebalance the impacts of patriarchal systems? I hope that you enjoy this episode and that it gives you permission to live a life of purpose and to carve out a path for yourself in co-creation with the deeper layers of this world. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Joe, I am delighted to welcome you to The Future is Beautiful. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. The now is beautiful too.
Well, of course, but that's implied, isn't it?
This is now is for the future anyway. People listen to it in the future, so it's going to be beautiful.
Exactly. Aren't we always jumping timelines or something?
Yeah, it's definitely in this pandemic. I don't seem to forget what time is. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's lovely to witness you in your headphone glory and, existing with a smile. So this is fantastic.
We had a really lovely conversation in preparation of all the things that we weren't going to talk about today. And they included Boris Johnson and the Chinese government.
Yeah.
So just getting that out there, that those are not themes that are going to be covered in any depth. But there was something that you said that has stayed with me this morning, which was about being designed for crisis or prepared for crisis. I feel like at this time that we're in, with where we're at with the pandemic and the climate situation and all kinds of other difficulties that our kind of general lifestyles hold, from the isolation to refugee crisis, we can just go on listing them. There can sometimes be a sense of like, oh, it's too much, and when will things get back to something else that's different, and a kind of longing for life to be easy. When you said that, I just remembered that phrase, because actually I feel like this is a time of understanding our resilience and recognizing that we're always more, that we can always be more, and that there's more of us that we can uncover. And I wondered what you'd like to share with us around managing in crisis and chaos and thriving even in it.
Even better, yeah. Crisis is the occurrence of something unpredicted. And that's why it's such a shock. And this is also why it can put the body into shock. And this can have a sudden impact on someone's mind and state, and throw them off center, off balance. Even if you're expecting it, it's still a shock. What I mean by being designed for crisis is knowledge, that practice and experience that center is designed to move, and that there is not a fixed point. In fact, as a person, you're an ever-changing, evolving sequence of people, effectively, rather than too much identification with this idea or fixed existence or being. Predominantly from my own perspective, I think that one of this is to do with the fact that I've lived quite intentionally around the acceptance of death, and acceptance of my own death in particular. And part of this was because when I was quite young, around 15, I think, I was diagnosed. I was getting pains in my chest. I was diagnosed with a type of heart disease, and the doctors told me that firstly, I had a 50% chance of open heart surgery by the time I was 30. And that secondly, which is the most amusing part, is that I shouldn't go on roller coasters. I shouldn't do any extreme sports. I shouldn't take any drugs, and I shouldn't do any big partying and this kind of thing. So, by the time I'd walked out of that meeting, I thought, okay, well, firstly, I'm not going to follow any of their advice, because that sounds like a terrible life. I really wanted to enjoy my life and not find it full of obstacles.
What's life without a roller coaster?
I mean, if you can't go to theme parks, really, what kind of life are you living? Probably one that's the equivalent of a lockdown.
Let's be clear, that's the thing we've all been missing the most this year.
That's right. Had he been probably a more empathic doctor, he probably would have said, don't fall in love and have your heart broken. Because these are the kind of things that really make us shudder from the inside, in that beautiful organ we call the heart. So I decided very frankly and personally to ignore that at age 15. And that was at roughly the same time that I started to do more daily practices around understanding and accepting my inevitable death, which was not imminent, but was present. There are various shamanic practices for that and various Buddhist practices. Partly that gave me the power and the feeling that I was going to be okay, despite such quite a challenging diagnosis. And just to, quickly cut the story into what's the situation now, I got tested again before I was 30 and they said, no problem, nothing's changed, you're going to be fine. We thought it was going to be a problem, but it's not. And I was like, thank God I didn't listen to you. Thank God I didn't restrict my life and I lived fully. And I think partly by living fully, I doing very strenuous sports and martial arts and stuff, it made me think those probably helped my heart. If I'd kind of lived a sheltered life, I wouldn't have been able to allow my heart to beat as hard and as passionately as it had done in my life. So I felt like it was almost like my saving grace was to not follow that logic. Now, that's a personal choice, and it's not something I'm recommending. Everyone should make their own choice. So one thing is living with death. When you live with death, you start to kind of accept that there is not only a crisis, but maybe the biggest crisis can happen at any point. For me, that is a case of resilience, but what it's also about is not having yourself limited by boundaries. And part of those boundaries can be healthy. And I'm not saying the boundary is not healthy, but it's also saying, like, what does it mean to expand yourself and your idea of self and your idea of what is your capacity? Because when you can push these boundaries and stuff, you start to realize, well, you can handle more. And inevitably, as you grow through life, more shit happens. You carry, in some ways, more baggage, or at least tougher things can happen, and they can happen at any point. But, they start to accumulate. And so it's almost like you have to grow into that. And that growth of the self, it's not only inevitable, but it's something, if we start to prepare for and embrace, it prepares us for these situations which are crises. Very frankly, it's a way of encompassing the world within yourself. That's how I see it. And particularly in the East, you have this idea of ego death and ego dissolution. And in the West, it's like, you can't really copy that. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but primarily it's because we were taught when we grew up to have an ego and it to be totally acceptable, and it's reinforced in this idea of individuality. So, a Westerner trying to just do ego dissolution, it's going to take them a long time, plus be very challenging. It's almost like pushing a brick up a big stone up a hill, it's a kind of Sisyphean experience. But if you instead flip the script and you say, well, what about making the ego as big as the world? Thus, I'm connected to everything. And thus, I now don't have my own individuality anymore. This is a good path, because now your ego is everything. Thus, you are not anymore yourself. So I think that the ability to expand those boundaries and to connect, unify, and become part of the entire world is the preparation for the crisis, because then you're accepting death, you're accepting the shadow, you're accepting all the bad things about all the people you love and the people you don't love, and still the bad things that they do too. And you can do that through compassion, you can do that through love, but primarily it's also done through allowing yourself not to be the complete arbiter of truth. And that means you're taking your guidance from things larger than you. And this is about kind of the expansion of that self, an expansion of your boundaries, so that something happens, it's just part of you too. And that's about sort of mirror of the world. And that's kind of what I mean by being designed for crisis. And that tolerance, that ability to absorb whether things are good, bad, whatever will service this kind of anti-shock situation. So you can have things happen and you say, okay, I'm not going to immediately react. I'm not going to immediately change how I'm feeling, but I'm going to absorb it, sit on it, let it be. And from that, allow it to grow me into a place where I had more understanding of maybe even the most terrible things that can happen, unfortunately.
It's really beautifully put. And I can relate a lot to facing death, like early on. For me, it was in a series of near-death experiences and an accident where my friend died in my late teens, early 20s, that just meant that I had to find a different perspective on life than those around me, and also had experienced, such closeness of death, that I realized that in itself wasn't scary, and then got really obsessed with kind of trying to understand what death really was, in all the different ways and the different traditions, until I could make sense of especially what had happened to my friend. I find that the process of understanding grief and death as a kind of constant life process, that there's always going to be things dying, parts of us dying, parts of our identity, relationships, people. And of course, in a pandemic, this sort of heightened experience of death being close on a collective level that we're experiencing right now. For you, within the process of grief and coming into a space where you really allow yourself to grieve so that you can continue to live, I wonder what you want to share about that. I mean, I know that we're sitting here having both experienced the death of our fathers in the not too distant past, and that many of our friends that are listening will be experiencing grief.
Yeah, interesting thing. I nearly died when I was 5 from drowning, and I just wasn't at that place where I could relate to it and impose methods and practices which allowed me to process that. So by the age of 15, this became something that I was actively conscious of. And that's partly, these things can happen, but it's about deploying it in a conscious fashion and the regular one, which allows you to deal with it. So, which can be achieved without having such crises as well. In terms of grief, firstly, we've both been through the loss of our fathers, which is, for anybody, especially if they're close to them, a huge rug being pulled from under you. And that rug being something that you grew up on and protected you for your whole life. And it inevitably will bring a lot of things to the surface and a lot of feelings, a lot of which are described as grief, but of course our own characters and our own character flaws as well, both the positive and the negative. It can be an opportunity to really shine, because in some ways the barrier has been taken away. Grief itself, in that experience, that part of the process, which is manifold, I find it a lot like water in some ways. My personal experience of grief is a bit like tides that come in and completely kind of wash over you to the point where you're submerged in visceral pain and sadness, and then it recedes. And in some ways, it's almost like it's cleansed the beach of the soul that it just covered, and you feel relief that it's over, but it's almost like a tide that comes in and out. At some point for me, it was regular. And part of the process of grief was actually occurring prior to my father's passing, because he was chronically sick, and there was a period where I was already grieving for the situation. So it's not something that just happens because it's trigger past, okay, now you start grieving. No, it can be happening whenever you find a loss of something. And he had about 6 months prior to his passing where he started to lose capacity and what I would call my familiar capacity with his ability to be my father. So that process of grief preceded his passing and continued afterwards. I think one of the key kind of takeaways that I got from it, that I found to be almost like an honest truth, is the reason it hurts, the reason I was grieving, is because I still had so much more love to give him, and there wasn't anywhere to put that love. And when I started to understand that actually that feeling, that heartbreak, that feeling of complete guttedness and just loss, which is what grief can manifest as, is called in lots of other things. But I found that was because I still very much loved him. I still wanted to show that love, and there was nowhere for it to go. So I had to really say, okay, well, this is what's happening. I'm full of love in my heart for this person, and I need to now look at a way for this to be channeled, because otherwise it's just breaking my heart, And that's a very vulnerable position, but when you really get down to it, because, it's like I've done a lot of work in trying to let go of people I thought I was, like getting rid of the jackets, the protection actually that we put on in order to survive, especially in London as a kid and a teenager. But you have to, get rid of those things in order to really feel and connect with the world. For me, knowing that my grieving was actually about, my capacity to love allowed me to start to heal properly and to find places to put that. And it's something which is still a challenge because I think it's probably going to continue for the rest of my life. But by doing that and that conversion, and this is talked about quite a lot in, for instance, Tibetan Buddhism, where they're doing these kind of Tonglen practices, which are converting, let's say, types of energies into better, or let's say non-negative energies, and maybe ones that go from pain into compassion and love, and that kind of conversion. And by doing that, that's allowed that pain to then allow me to live. And so this is about when you said, like, how does grief allow us to live maybe more fully or more in tune without crippling our entire life, which it does do for periods of time. The question is then you still have so much more to give and to love, and the world needs that. It's about kind of opening yourself more, and in some ways letting, I think a lot of people have heard the saying, when it's, the pain in us or the flaws in us is where the light comes in. And so if you have a crack and you have certain things, which is also the most painful elements of your life, this is also where the light can come in and where it can shine out somehow. So I think grief is that doorway into saying, well, yeah, that's suffering, and with suffering can come extreme balance of love. And from that love, you can create a change of yourself. And of course, anyone who's coming into contact with you. But most importantly, you can convert the grief into something which is allowing you to live more fully as you, in a confident, beautiful way. And the effect on me, very simply, was I've lived a fairly rambunctious life with a lot of barriers, because that both protected me and enabled me. And the effect for me is really like to allow myself to be comfortable with being very vulnerable, which is allowing me really to connect more deeply in that simple way to life and all that it brings, not just the bits that we might want.
Yeah, I love that reminder that the root of the pain is how much love that we have, and that this is also, in other types of grieving and of relationships, moving away from a particular community, that it is that thing of like, but we feel all that love all at once and don't know what to do with it. And when we know that, then we can also, through a gentle process of actually allowing ourselves to feel that pain and that love, find where else we're being invited to share it.
And it's very easy to find and identify, because it's basically, if you really talk about something that makes your heart shake and your voice shake, this is the area you need to stay on and be compassionate and loving to yourself to allow it to transform. It's a process. It's not something that's just, oh, great, did it yesterday. Today I'm living my fullest Instagram life. Here's all the memes that say how good it, live your full life and all that kind of crazy stuff. But the truth is I've led an incredibly full life already. Like, I don't regret a moment. I feel like, till me today, like I'm good, like stick a fork in me. Like I feel like I really did already chase my heart and my dreams. And I, in a lot of ways, achieved everything I could ever imagine when I was younger. And now perhaps I imagine a bigger life. So I have new dreams, but I feel very content and at peace with myself. And that's what's allowed me to not kind of, I would say, fixate on external realities and really allow the process of grieving and really allow the pain to change me fundamentally as a person, as opposed to saying, I don't know, I'm going to go distract myself by working really hard, which I have a history of doing, because we all do in some ways, finding something that, maybe this is the most important thing now. And it's like, probably not. You probably need to heal, and that's okay.
Although there's worse places to put that energy than into projects that
100%. I was doing nice and polite at this circumstance. Yeah, there's a lot of bad shit you can do. You could train up as, I don't know, a banker or something. No, seriously, grief comes like from 20 different directions at once and comes in many forms. I think my curiosity around psychology, which I've always had, partly because my mum's a psychotherapist. I grew up in a house full of psychology books, which I'd read without telling anyone. I'd just read whatever's nearest. And I had this hunger for what it is that's making us in our mind, what we think we are, and also all the different random crazy things that the mind can create. But that's really made me kind of analyze and think about what's below perhaps the feelings. And it just keeps coming back to, how can I open it up more? And it's terrifying. Even right now, just saying that, like, literally sends like energy through my body. But how can you become more vulnerable? How do you become more loving? And it's like this whole, well, not the whole world, but a lot of the society that we are in, especially in any area that's, chasing money and wealth and success in a way which is completely disingenuous in terms of what is a real strong value system or good for us. It just puts things into focus. It's like, okay, I really don't have time for that nonsense. How do we make someone's life change a bit better today? And what are we doing today that allows us to be more ourselves? And this is really the gold. This is the magic. And it doesn't have to be mystical or something to do with the stars or something. It's just in you. It is what you are. And there's a potential there to just completely become the very being of change, that catalyst. And I think that, for instance, my life has been a lot about how do I change things outside of myself. And that's not to say I wasn't working internally, but, my literal practice, my work has been like, okay, I'm going to be a change maker. I'm going to do impact stuff. I'm going to work on sustainability and whatever's cutting edge and all these things. And that's great because the world needs it. And I don't regret any of it. But there's also the very, very acute reality, which is that all of the maladaptions in this world and all of the situations that we're facing, challenges, has been created by our own internal selves. It's so true that you have to change yourself before you can change the world. And I know that because I have changed the world. But at the same time, I think I'm in a better position really looking inside myself over all these years to do that. And the emphasis is no longer on what is the external. It's more like, okay, how do I feel each day? Is my sanity present? This lockdown is going to make us all thinking, at least double checking ourselves and saying, am I okay today? Like, big question, it's good. It's worth asking. And if you're not, take a little bit of time out, find something that will nourish you and support you, because that's all there is.
I resonate with so much of that journey. And, you and I first met a decade or so ago in the corridors of change making and sustainability. I had a really colossal burnout and came to that place of, okay, like the Rumi quote, about wanting to change the world, but then like the wisdom of wanting to change yourself. Where I'm at with it now is that we just need to do both of them at the same time. We can't kind of wait for a perfection of having become self-realized enough to step back into all of that mess and chaos. And that also, it's like we have to have that discipline of doing them both at the same time, so that we are developing that relationship with ourselves and we are understanding more of where we're coming from and what's driving us, where the wounds are that we can pour light into. And at the same time that we stay present into this now and into where there are opportunities and potential to not just make the world just a little bit better for someone, but if we've got the ability to do something that makes it a lot better for a lot more people, that we keep that all open.
Yeah, I think that there's also, confusion between service, duty, and allowing things to unravel naturally in the order of things. especially in England, we're taught to be such powerful individuals that, what we do is matters to an extent, maybe, but also really not. That can be crushing because people are so attached to their opinions, for instance, and they're thinking, oh, I believe this. And it's like, well, you know what? It really doesn't matter what you believe. If you can't be kind to someone who doesn't believe the same thing, in fact, who triggers you, and you still can't be kind to them, you've got so much to open yourself out to, so much to learn. And that means everything, even the core part of you which thinks that's really bad and evil. It's like, okay, yes, but unfortunately, people get put in circumstances where they do become murderers, or they do things, and it's terrible, but they're living their hell. They're living in their hell. It's now for them. There is no point where they're not living in it. And this is the corruption of the soul. And when you realize this, it's like, oh, even the people who are nasty people in this way, you're thinking, I have compassion for you, and I wish you weren't living in your hell. I think things would have been different had you not been. And it doesn't mean that you need to release everyone who's completely crazy and all this stuff, but it does mean that you can kind of integrate these things otherwise are quite big aversions to you as an individual, and it somehow reconciles the world, because otherwise you're always kind of splitting the world down the middle and saying, these things are good, and these things are not so good, so I'm going to be on the good side, which inevitably at some point you're going to go, oh shit, I did something that isn't so good, right? And then it becomes a schism, and that schism can make you feel completely off track, or these kind of things. But the reality is, how do you reconcile it and say, yes, it's a bit like the yin yang sign, right? So there's a bit of good, a little bit of bad in the good, and then there's the bad and a little bit of good in the bad, and then together it's like a reality, right? It reminds me of a poem. Like, can I read it?
Of course.
Probably everyone knows about it, but it's called Mary Oliver, of no relation. It's funny I have to say that. And it's the poem called Wild Geese. And I actually, it's a time where I don't have such a clarity of memory, but I believe I read this out at my father's funeral, so I wanted to share it too. But yeah. And she reads it so much better than me, so do Google her. She's got an American accent as well, so it's completely different. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And so, just get out there, sit in a park, recognize it's all okay, even though it feels like a big trouble, and it will pass.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the Global Patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation. I want to ask you about the work that you've done in the world, how you've had the freedom to create a career or a life that covers many different industries, that explores different themes, and what the thread was for you going through that. And so in the time that I've known you, I've witnessed you doing sustainability events and as a London leader, off in China, doing more sustainability work, now doing beautiful things with CBD oil and health. And I know that there's also many layers underneath that of things that I have no idea that you've done, and perhaps many people have no idea that you've done. How have you either chosen that path or allowed that path to unfold? And what do you want to share with us about some of the things that you've done and why?
I think there is a lot of discourse between the heart and the head. The head is filled with things that have been taught to it. Get a job, be safe, you're worth X, right? This is something you're taught, and then you regurgitate somehow, like, I am good at this, I am supposed to be this,
I'm an expert.
Expert, even worse, it's more ingrained. Oh no. Yeah, but like I am, and then fill in the blank, like that's all head stuff. I recognized that the head and the identity that is created can be limiting. In fact, it's probably the main limit for most people. Whereas the heart is like this kind of it's like a puppy dog. It's like, it's there, it's loving, it wants to eat. It doesn't actually eat, but it's like puppies. It's very obvious in some ways, as long as you listen to it. My feeling initially when I started to kind of say, well, what do I want to do in life, was very much about how do I create more freedom for myself, because I didn't want to get locked into something. And frankly, I don't feel that I identify with a lot of things. I don't even feel like a white male, but that's what I am. So it's like a weird thing. It's almost like when the more you really let go of who you think you are, the more you get closer to the truth. And that really gets away with all of the external physical approaches. It gets rid of all the ideas that people say, oh, you're this thing or that thing. Also, how you tell yourself that. Actually, when I went into a darkness retreat, and after 5 days in darkness, there was a big question kind of posed, which was, who are you and what are you? And all I could come up with was, I'm here to help. That was it. And everything else was irrelevant. It was like, I don't even feel I'm human. I'm just here to I'm here to help. Like, what do you need? That was it. And part of that exploration of opening up what is freedom made me think, okay, well, I'm just going to give it a really good shot, whatever I'm doing. This is like, I don't know if you know of Thich Nhat Hanh or Zen Buddhism. So Zen Buddhism was invented by this guy called Bodhidharma, or originated from him. I wouldn't say invented. It sounds like a technology. It is its form. It originated with him. And Bodhidharma was an Indian monk who also invented or started Kung Fu. So I did a lot of martial arts, and partly that was really showing me physical boundaries are not really what we assume them to be. So I kind of started to understand I could transcend my physicality in some form and another, and that's a whole other world, and some of that is experiential only. But I applied it, and I thought, okay, well, for instance, I'm going to do whatever I'm doing in my work, and in terms of Zen business, it's like, okay, I'm just going to focus on the one thing that I'm doing at a time, and that's going to be all my heart and what I'm doing. I did it, and I did it to an extent which a lot of people would think was completely crazy. So there have been multiple times I had no money whatsoever. Probably for 8 years, I was living in a way which is completely no security net whatsoever. Nothing, like no regular income, no savings, no idea what was going to happen next. And each day I had to wake up and say, am I doing the thing that I believe in? Yes, continue doing it. And I think that an incredible amount of people would never do that. And I think that it's a practice that you have to basically really be resolute about, because it was insane. I ended up, for instance, when I flew to China to move to China, I think I had £10 in my bank account. I remember going to Heathrow and not having enough money to get back to the city. That was, I had clothes, I had a ticket, I knew someone was going to meet me on the other end, but I mean, that's crazy. I don't even think you're allowed to do that. I think you're meant to go into the country with some money. Otherwise you could end up living there, which I did for 6 years. This is almost like I was like, okay, I'm taking a one-way ticket, on everything. And it's like, I'm not looking back. I'm not going to give myself a safety net, and I'm not going to stop. And I did that. And I did that for a long time. And a great friend of mine says that his motto is jump and the net will appear. That is real. That's so real. But it can put you in very uncomfortable positions, and it can make it really test what your boundaries are. But I did that, and that was what gave me my freedom and ability to transcend boundaries and to move across worlds. I've had the luck and the fortune and the opportunity to work from people like royalty to incredibly rare individuals to your everyday person and everyone in between. It's been such a genuine kind of immersion in the world where I had no shelter from whatever was to come. And that was done through being, I guess, somehow courageous in the fact that I didn't have any other options. I didn't give myself other options. And, it's really funny. I'm not sure I'd even recommend it to anyone else. So it's almost like if someone said, oh, you've done this, shall I do it? I'd be like, no, probably not. I'm not sure I'd recommend it. But that's what I did. And, and partly that's just about owning your own life and saying, this is my life. I'm going to do it in the way I'm going to do it, and fully taking responsibility for all accountability and for what comes. And I wouldn't have it any other way. That's what I allowed for. So was it chosen? Yes. And I also did I let it unfold? I had to. I found some incredible success, and I lost incredible things. I went from, at one point I was, doing rather well by anyone's standards. And shortly afterwards, I had a big collapse and had almost nothing to my name. And we're talking, like complete up and down journey of an entrepreneur, from multi-millions to nothing in the space of a second. Those experiences, I just remember coming back to my meditation practice and recognizing actually how that really mattered. And I felt quite lifted and light because I didn't have all this burden of loads of staff and cash flow sheets and all this other stuff. That journey is something which is, it's one hell of it's a really big thing. And I think that I really, I do kind of relate to these Hollywood stories of like entrepreneurs. I go, well, yeah, that's literally how it works. Like when you put everything on the line, it's boom or bust. And sometimes it's bust, and you have to pick yourself up literally without anything and not knowing anything and just get going again. And that's massively challenging. But once you do that a few times, you suddenly realize, well, this moment is going to pass, and the future, shall I say it?
Go on.
The future will be beautiful again.
Because now is beautiful.
Yeah, now is beautiful. I had a lot of doubt as well. I lived for a period of time where I felt not only doubtful about myself, and it was an element of that thing where they talk about imposter stuff. So it's like almost like all the external success is so high that the internal self isn't ready. That, included again, situations, very much public situations, which I withdrew from because I didn't feel like this was real. And what I realized was it wasn't to do with an industry or a sector. I had a degree of success as an artist, and I decided this art world is not good for me anymore. So I pulled away from it, even though I was exhibited at, like, amongst Tracy Emin, Mark Quinn, and about, some very, very high profile artists. And had work sold, and I suddenly went, this isn't for me. I'm quitting. And I have now made artwork personally, but haven't shown many people. I haven't exhibited for 15 years. I then did events, and it's like, okay, well, no one taught me how to do events. I just said, I'm going to do events. And I end up, I think the attendance was 1.6 million people across my events. So it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of impact. Then, I end up sitting on a board of individuals who were helping shape the entire policy for events and sustainability globally, and that work was used for the Olympics, and it was work used for the American ASTM standards. It was used for the largest hotel chains in the world. And that was the start. And then I was like, okay, well, now it's not me anymore. So I let it go. I ended up doing stuff in startups and technology and, working on multi-billion pound companies and helping them turn around their operations, and that being success, as in it worked. And the whole time I was like, well, I studied art. I was an artist, and I learned about dreaming. That's what I studied. I studied lucid dreaming for my artwork and how people transmit creativity through their unconscious into their conscious through dreaming and imagination and visualization. So there was a point where, for instance, when I came back from China, and I was just like, you know what? I need to test this. I need to work out if I should have this doubt anymore. Because there was always something coming, do I know this? Is this me just convincing someone? Because I like to be persuasive. So I went back to study, and I studied again, and I studied at what's probably 3 of the world's top educational institutions. And I realized that actually it was okay. And that a lot of people in very high positions don't know what they're doing either, and they're just winging it. And I had worked so hard, and I'd taken so much accountability for my efforts that I actually knew what I was doing. And that was amazing, because it was like, okay, so when you don't take accountability, you probably don't listen as hard and you don't work as hard. Whereas when you do, you're like, everything I do is going to make an impact. So I better know what I'm doing. So I'd worked hard enough, and I'd done it properly. And what I realized is these big, famous institutions, they lacked information and stuff that I'd studied and made part of my practice. Things like, what does it mean to have a heart involved in the discussion? What does it mean when you have compassion for the users? What does it mean when you look at value systems within a technology? Let's say, shouldn't be fringe stuff, but it becomes fringe stuff when you're just talking about work and industry. And I was so grateful for having the chance to reflect like that and to do that. And I did a postgraduates. I found them fantastic, met beautiful people. And I also was lucky enough to go to Bhutan to go and study gross national happiness. I was in the first cohort of business. They called us business leaders, but whatever, business people who turned up to learn from the government and the systems there. So we went, we met princess, and we met like the head monk, and then we met like the biggest business people and all this stuff. But the whole point, we had these 70 indicators, which were how you measure value. And this whole world that we're living in, it's created Zoom and, probably the headphones on working and the clothes. It's all based around this completely other model, which is, how do you extract value from resource effectively? And that's like a value system which needs to be flipped on its head. So the journey into integrative work, heart, mind, that's where I was like, okay, this is the goal. And that's where I've come to from this journey, and found that it applies across many sectors and many industries, and it does allow for change.
It's really powerful. And actually the most powerful part of it was that as you were sharing your journey, the signal was less good than when we were talking earlier, which was almost as if to say the detail doesn't matter. It's what you've learned, the way of approaching life that is important.
I think I've come to the point where my journey as an entrepreneur is like, I don't, whatever. I don't really care about it anymore. What I care about is how to help people go through their own journey, and how that the next thing I can do can really make an impact. That's what I'm really interested in. maybe partly sharing my journey, but also there's a lot of things that are not precious that don't need to be shared.
With that as your question, what are you focusing your energy on now and why?
I have been coming to conclusions, perhaps realizations, epiphanies, whatever they may be, around my spiritual practice and the power and impact of that upon any other thing I'm manifesting. So I have started to take a more long-term view. Partly this is because now I know I'm not just going to die, suddenly, at least for now. So having a more long-term view, which allows me to really start to get into commitments to myself. And I think that it's partly that root of discipline, which we try and avoid when we're younger. Or at least I did substantially try and avoid. Despite working very hard, I would just try and work on lots of things at different times.
Although saying that, I do remember being at your house on a Sunday night, not to see the person you were living with, and you were sitting doing a list of what you were going to do the next day.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying, I do this every night.
Yeah, I don't do it every night anymore, but I do usually have a list that I'm doing each day. It's the only predictable anchor that I had for a long time. Nearly every day has been different for a very long time, which is what I deliberately created for myself. So I should not complain. Having ability to think a bit more long term now has come from stability. It's come from financial stability. That's come from my work. It's come from a discipline of practice. I've probably been meditating, at least I can remember, for over 30 years. It's come from weathering a fair amount of storms, so to speak. So there's a maturity that is growing on me, despite me wishing that perhaps it didn't exist subconsciously, which is making me think a lot bigger. This is also because the goals I had when I was younger, I pretty much nailed. And it took me about 10 years. And then after nailing them, I thought, I'm going to take a break. And then I realized I can't take a break. It took about a year. And I was like, oh no, I really can't put this stuff down because I'm just obsessed with doing stuff. And so I was like, okay, take a longer break and just give it up. Just say what really comes underneath it. Inevitably, I was right. I should just keep doing things because ultimately that's the point. That's why I'm here. Is that I'm meant to keep doing these things, no matter, even if I start pretending that I should just live in the mountains and meditate. No, Joe, you're supposed to do the things that come calling for you because that's what you are. And even when you reject them with the view that they might be manifested in the way that you don't want, actually it's time. So after years of saying no to people on the phone and the email and saying, I'm not doing this, thank you, effectively, in more polite terms, often by saying I'm very busy with something, which might or might not be the case. I've decided
playing computer games, go away.
Do you know what? There's some great computer games out there. I've started saying yes again. What's crazy about that is a number of people came into my life around about the same time were just like, Joe, why are you not doing this? Which is, wants to know this stuff. And I'm like, okay, point taken. I'll think about it. I think this is a turning point in my life where it's like, okay, time to do something big again. This time with a very strong foundation. And that maturity, which isn't just laissez-faire. I think I relied a lot on some idea that, whatever I touch, I can do. Some sort of idea of, I think it's the freedom of youth. And it's not that I'm old now. I think I've finally recognized that I have started aging, which is it literally hit me in the pandemic when I looked in the mirror. I was like, oh my God, I have a white hair in my beard. It's like, I was like, oh my God. And it's like, I just imagined that I was in this Peter Pan land where I could do whatever I wanted. And I thought, oh God, maybe I don't have so much time left. Maybe I have another 30 years. I can do magical things. And maybe I need to think a lot bigger and dream bigger because they do come true. Because you can manifest, you believe. And I'm prepared to go full way to do that. And I know I am because that's what I'm about. So it's like, okay, Joe, what's the big challenge? Better get your teeth into it now because, time's ticking and after this planet, who knows where you'll be, but it's time to not spend the whole day playing computer games.
Mhm. So before you go into like that next bit, I guess that sense of everything you touch, turns to gold, and how,
That's not true, but it's what I
yeah,
had believed.
yeah. I guess I just want to ask a little bit in this space, because obviously there's a huge amount of like drive and dedication and intelligence and creativity. But do you feel like all those opportunities would have come to you so easily if you hadn't been in a white male body?
Well, the truth of the world is no, probably not, because this whole system is completely fucked. People are discriminated against all the time for superficial reasons and cultural reasons. I saw it in China. Anyone who's not Chinese, there's a level of discrimination. So even being a white male, I know what it's like not be accepted, or at least totally discriminated against, which is fantastic for me to know that and to take that on board and to say, well, it's not personal. It's just, that's the reality of all these different places and different countries. You have different types of discrimination, but there are similarities. And unfortunately, they are gender specific, they're race specific. In a lot of ways, the really crippling thing is to do with the economic problem, whereby, people don't have access to education. They don't even have the beginning chance to have a go. And that to say that sexism and racism isn't terrible as well. In addition, there is, extreme poverty where you have probably the equivalent of Einstein living in this wonderful black girl who lives in Africa, and she's like the smartest thing ever, and she never gets the chance to realize that as well. So I am grateful for where I am and what I am, and knowingly that not only did I work very hard for it, but in addition, I had the benefit of being in the body that I'm in. And that's definitely true. And I've noticed that partly because I've always worked with a lot of women, for instance, and it so pisses me off that, like, when, for instance, clients would like double question one of my colleagues who's super intelligent, better at whatever they're doing than me, but I'd have to come talk to the client and get them to accept it. And it's just like, whilst recognizing this discrimination taking place, I also think it's abhorrent. I do also know that there is huge amounts of other biases. I think there's like something like 80 biases or something that's been determined, and I'm not familiar with all of them. So probably I have bias too. Like, for instance, in the West, there's a huge bias towards old people or the elderly. In China, they don't have that really. I mean, when you're old, you're wise, and in this country, you're old and you're suddenly redundant. I think I've probably done that a bit when I was younger, definitely looking and thinking, oh, you've done it, but you fucked up. I want to do it my way. This is a problem we're all facing. You didn't sort it out. I think I can sort it out, which is a completely arrogant, ridiculous position to take, but it would probably underline some of my youthful confidence, like, oh, I can make the change and you didn't do it, which is just bonkers, trying to leave that whole crap, to the past. But no, absolutely. And, England as well. England specifically pisses me off, having grown up here. I grew up in Hackney. I was in the minority in my primary school as a white kid. There were more people of lots of different beautiful colors in my classes than there were white kids. That was what my primary school was. And within that, my parents are Tibetan Buddhists. So, you'd have this thing like in the assembly when all the kids come together, and the people like, put your hands up if you're Christian, put your hands up if you're Islamic, put your hands up if you're Hindu, quite a lot of different hands going up. Just put your hands up if you're Buddhist. It's just me. There were no other kids. And frankly, if you don't know about Buddhism, it's not a thing that converts people. So again, it's like, do I really identify as Buddhist? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really care, nor do any of the Buddhists, right? So, the headmaster's kind of looking at me, being like, put up your hand because I want to show diversity. And I'm thinking, I don't like you. You've pinpointed me in a situation which is just going to add more questions and make me not fit in. I've had various different experiences of that kind of thing going through and growing up. Frankly, I grew up in a place that at the time, 1980, late 80s, was, I think, the third poorest place in the country. So there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of mental health issues. I had scares. I had a guy chase me with a hammer when I was about 6 years old down the road. There were gangs. There was a lot of gang violence. There weren't such good prospects. A lot of my friends weren't thinking about they could change the world. It was like they were thinking how not to be in prison, or how they could maybe get some work while they're in education. Really was not an easy place to be. And that's where I grew up. That's where I'm from. And I've done enough of my own hard work. And partly that's, I think my ethic of hard work has come from that, which is I'm not from a wealthy place in the UK. Even though I'm white male, I'm from a place where it was a challenge. And there's probably not very many people like me that exist fundamentally. There was not a lot of people like me at all. In fact, I didn't meet very many of people like me for a long time. And maybe that's why I've never felt like I fully fitted in, but at the same time, everyone is also my brother and sister. So there's a great leveler there where I feel deep compassion for people who are finding that they are challenged by society, because frankly, society's fucked. I'm not going to swear again because I'm trying not to swear as much.
We just mark all the episodes as explicit at this point.
Okay, just put a big beep over it,
It's just easier. But yeah, there's something about this culture in particular where so many people feel like they don't fit into it. The kind of the English way, it sort of creates a sense of belonging that no one can quite understand or feel part of. I found it interesting talking to friends from all different class, race, backgrounds in England, and that often being a similar feeling.
I think England is very diverse as well. Let's put that in perspective. Sorry, England's not that diverse. London is very diverse, which I grew up in. There is that's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful. And there isn't really many places like that in the world, and I've traveled around this world and I've seen places that are supposed to be diverse and they're not. I think there's an extent which is that melting pot is glorious. And that is what it means to be English. For me, that's what it means to be a Londoner. It's like you could have any skin color, you can speak any language, you're a Londoner. It's not like, oh, you deserve to be here, you are here, that's it. End of story. I think it's very different in the countryside. I think it's very different in certain parts of England. But then you have places like Bradford, which, there's tons of really good Indian curry houses there.
Okay, let's go back to...
Oh, I love it. I want to go there and get some food. But a lot of the English culture, which is promoted, is bullshit. It's rested on what is effectively a totally terrible colonial history of, again, taking any sort of material, personal or land material, and using it to use like a using culture. It's mine, I own it, and it's not really yours. You just stole it. And that's what a lot of the English culture that's perpetuated and promoted is. That's all it is. All of those traditional kind of formal rituals are pretty much based on a time which is not relevant to what we know as kind of ethical.
Absolutely. And at this moment of Brexit, we're kind of feeling that kind of coming into the space of what does it mean to be English, and having those borders and everything that goes along with that. It's just bringing up actually a lot of that about the kind of the heritage of England and all of this stuff about the royal family, and just the notion that the royal family might not be a racist family is kind of hilarious when you look at global history. And so it's interesting that that's even being discussed at this time.
I think that the thing that people are missing is the fact is that royal institution is racist, right? The institution of that and the monarchy, that's racist. Idea that those people are more elite, they have more access, more privilege, there's something completely fucked up about that. Now, that's not a judgment on individuals, and frankly, I don't know them, but the whole institution is wrong, right? Like, why are we not talking about the system, which is the thing that breeds racism anyway? It's a system. It's irrelevant to talk about one person who could be completely racist. It's like, yeah, but that's one person. What bred them? What created that thing? That's the thing we need to change,
Absolutely. And when I say family, I'm referring to the institution. I'm not thinking of individuals, but what has created that family exists in that way, and that family is known across the whole world. in a certain way and what that means.
This is how I see it. England hasn't admitted it made mistakes. And if you can't admit it, you can't heal it. It's like England's an alcoholic that's going, we don't drink anymore, and then just sneakily like having a bit of whiskey. And it's like, no, the entire history that you've based England's supremacy and quality and England being great on, it's a racist, destructive, horrific past. If you cannot accept that and integrate it, then we will not have that integration of the shadow of England. In fact, it will continue to be a schism. And that's the problem. It's like, why on earth not remove all those statues that were slave owners? Like, yeah, there's history. And then there's just like no one cares about those people anymore. Just get rid of them. It's like, they're terrible people. Why are there statues? Just burn them, melt them, and whatever, get rid of it, allow us to change, allow us to move forwards and integrate what's wrong and say it was wrong. That's the problem. They just don't admit it. No one's admitting it in the government. They're not going, oh yeah, we're wrong. And partly because they think they're going to pay out money. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, English government created concentration camps in Kenya in the 60s. You still haven't admitted it. How on earth are you going to create reconciliation in society without admitting these basic truths? And that was after all the horrific stuff in World War II. They still did it. It's like, you can't sweep shit under the carpet. You just cannot. It just can't, it's just there. And it's like, ugh. And I see it. And, the worst thing is that educational institutions that perpetuate it, that's what I really think is wrong. Partly because that's where it really changes people's minds, is when they're growing up and everything. And what you've got a lot in for instance, the public school system, which was designed to create officers for the colonial structure, is a brutal bullying system. So you have for instance, a lot of politicians have been through that. The reason they're bullies, the reason that they have no acceptance of their own vulnerability and no compassion for other people, is because they were fully bullied, treated like, and if they stuck their head out on the thing, they would have had even worse. And it's standard. That's still going on. And it's like, it was accepted as part of what makes people tougher. And thus they can go to, for instance, India and go and do massacres. Their heart's been closed and they've been treated and bullied. So they go off and go and kill people. And that's horrific. And that system, which was designed in Victorian times, it still exists in the UK. That's perpetuated this stuff.
Well, and also that the education system found commonly around the world is based on that UK education system.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But the good thing is, when you take it into other cultures, it doesn't have exactly the same effect. Like, for instance, almost identical system in Singapore, very different outcomes. Although the system is in other places, you don't get the same, like that same stuff going on elsewhere. It depends on the culture, of course. But yeah, England's got a lot to answer for that it's never accepted. And it's pointing fingers at all these other countries saying, you need to accept that you did wrong, etc. And they're not doing it themselves. And, one of the most amazing things that's come out of Germany, for instance, is the total acceptance that they were right-wing and the Nazis were a bad thing. They said, okay, that's it. No more of that. And they created a system where, it's illegal to do that. It's illegal to do a Heil Hitler sign. It's not acceptable, right, in their culture. And yet you've got England perpetuating, like, we rule the seas, singing it along on holidays. And it's like, hold on, the ruling seas actually meant you were killing other people. What has gone on here? Why have we not admitted it? Why have we not made those changes? And why are we not moving forwards from that? Instead, just accepting it as part of being English. I don't resonate.
Yeah, I don't resonate either. And I feel like most people that are British citizens don't resonate with that.
A lot of people don't look underneath the hood. This is partly the challenge, because there's a banality about it, which says, oh yeah, well, it's, it's just a flag, or it's a thing, the Commonwealth. And there's a lot of reasons, like they'll come up with reasons why it's good that they came and did this, like, oh, we brought the education system, or we gave them this and that. And it's all
trains.
Yeah. We gave them trains. All right, mate. Cool. That's great. Hope they're not English trains, because they don't run on time. And they're very expensive, which is ridiculous too. But anyway, I think that there's a justification of it. And I think that should be made a criminal offence, personally. And I think a lot of people might disagree with me because they think, oh, it's just banal stuff. And yes, we're against racism, but let's not change some fundamental institution in the UK. And it's like, well, actually, they're the same thing. And they're linked inherently. Like all those beautiful buildings that you find in the middle of London, that's all paid off slaves' deaths, effectively. That's money that came in from plantations and exploitation. That's the disenfranchisement of India, which was, the wealthiest country in the world, and then became basically completely extorted and extracted from English interests under the threat of the gun, just like they did to China, and they supplied China with opium to get them addicted to something that they could sell to them. It's just terrible, terrible stuff. It's the kind of thing that, that is genocide, that is deliberate mass murder, and it's not accepted officially in the narrative, and stories are the things that make up our lives. So there needs to be a way of accepting that. And I think, there's a lot of very clear, very precise, beautiful people talking about this in a much better, more articulate way than I am, with a lot more legitimacy in some ways, and who've done the time and real work to look into this. This is just my observation of the reality. This isn't what I've dedicated my life to. But it's so bloody obvious, and it's so sad. And it's like, it's like watching an elderly person, your family, deny they have a drinking problem, and yet they're still drinking, going to the doctor and being sick. And it's just like, everyone knows you're drinking. Everyone knows you're wrong.
So I want to bring us back to this moment that you're in your life and what you are dedicating this time to.
Lovely. Yeah, heavy subject, right? We're going into a complete change of a country.
It is heavy, and it's like I feel the need to shake it through my body a little bit, because this has been my first entire year in England, I think, in my entire life, because we always went to India and the States when I was a kid to see family, and it's quite an experience to be on this island, but without feeling part of the world in the way that I'm used to.
Yeah, I haven't traveled last year, and I've been traveling all over the place for a long time. It feels very challenging, very challenging. The space I'm in, yeah. What would you like to know?
Well, you were telling us that there was a sort of moment where various people were showing up and saying, well, why are you not doing this?
I've been on holiday, kind of, which is, I started to just do what I wanted to do at my own pace, which has been a real blessing. And you know what? It allowed me, for instance, to quit everything and go and look after my dad when he was sick. That's an amazing blessing to be able to do that. It's a blessing to have enough financial support that I can choose and not have to take what is given. I'm in an incredibly blessed place, and I've had to do a lot of self-discovery and healing, and partly that's because some parts of my life have been quite traumatic, and in a lot of ways I brought those situations on myself. I've gone through a period of reconciliation. Also, I think a lot of trying to just really drop the attitude, drop a bit of me that can react, which probably goes back as far as my childhood, in a place which was quite threatening, and I had to be quite tough. And I realized I don't need to be tough anymore. And by doing that, I can actually be more powerful in a way to bring people together. Because I think there was a challenge for some people to relate to me sometimes, which is understandable. I mean, it's not like you don't need to be Marmite, but you also don't need to be something for everyone. And I think also one of the main things I did in the past few years is to take myself out of the picture. So whatever I'm doing, but not so much me in the forefront of it. Whereas before I was leading from the front. So I'm doing things that I'm planning to do, and I'm involved in right now that, you might never see my name to them. And I'm very comfortable with that. And there's a blessing for that in the fact that it doesn't matter to me anymore. I don't need to have identification with the things I'm doing. I just need to know that they're really going to help people. On top of that, I was told pretty frankly that I don't communicate very well, and no one knows what I'm doing. Just like you said, some parts of what I've done and some parts not. And I think that there might be some real help to share what I've learned and what I've gone through with people generally. And so I might write a book. I was thinking about that. And I started saying yes to things. As again, now that means there'll be emails and people will come because I've dreamt it. Whenever I start to imagine and dream things, the reality starts showing up in my world, and it's clear as day. Just similarly, whenever I'm thinking things that aren't necessarily positive thoughts, I will break something. Some glass will break, something will fall off the wall. Happens all the time. So I had to just train my mind to get rid of all the negative thoughts, because I realized that things are literally breaking around me. So now I just have quite a lot of space in my mind. There's not much thought, and it's not because I'm stupid, although I might have thought that had I been born like that. But there's a big gap. There's a big gap of nothingness, and that's lovely. It means I'm quite spontaneous to what's happening, and there's a lot more connection to the heart. I'm mainly aiming only for positive intentions and problem solving things. I think it's time for me to get back on the horse, so to speak. And I don't know what form that will take, but I'm open to suggestions. So, if you have an idea, get in touch and let me know, We'll see. Maybe I can help.
And do you want to share anything about any of the work that you're doing at the moment?
I have to be aware that a lot of the work I've always done is quite confidential, whether it's new technologies or it's, for instance, helping someone change really big problems in their company that they don't really want people to know about. So I have ability to be quite confidential. I'm about to have a very amazing set of people join me at the CBD company that I've been supporting, and they are just incredible individuals. And so you can find out more, but it hasn't been released yet. But maybe you can put a link or something. That's really about helping people, because we give a lot of products to doctors and nurses, and even there's ex-policemen and veterans from the army who benefit a lot. And, that work I was doing actually to help my dad. And in some ways, his passing allowed me to be a lot more objective about it and let it go from my grip into a space which is allowing it to grow itself. So my hope there is that will continue without my direct oversight moving forwards, allowing me to be free to help do more and different things. I'm currently mentoring at Cambridge University for some graduates because I enjoy it. They are coming up with business ideas, and then I'm helping them kind of talk it through, I would guess. And that's lovely. I've been a supporter of various different projects, but some of them, I have this thing where I don't really want to talk about charity work that I do, because I find it's a bit kind of like blowing your own horn. And I think that if you're going to do something for other people, you don't need to talk about it, you just do it. So there's a lot of things I've been up to, which, I think I just won't talk about. But it's nice to do them, and it makes me happy to support people in that way, which is nothing to do with my own benefit. And that's partly like allowing me to have a glint in my eye and to turn up feeling a little bit magical, probably. So I do get the benefit from it. I don't need to talk to people about that. There are always wonderful people that can do with support. And I think that's probably what's going to happen mainly, is that I need to just help more people. Ultimately, that's what I'm here for. That's what I really came down to. So we'll see. There are several investments that I made that maybe turn out that, suddenly I make a fortune, which I'm incredibly lucky to have been in the right place, the right time to do. And if that happens, then fuck it, I'm going to be a philanthropist or something, I don't need the money myself. So I'm going to find ways to channel it into things that really change the world and support people to do that. So I think that this kind of idea of the next 20 years for me is just getting more and more freedom in a way which is just positive and gives me hope and love. And the challenge is just to open more and to be more receptive and to be less guarded, because that's kind of how I learned to be a little bit, and also to be more vulnerable. This is how I see it. To live more from the heart and just keep going, keep turning up. It's important to just turn up.
It is important, for sure. And as you're speaking, I'm wondering how what you're sharing relates to maybe a path that our menfolk that are listening go through. Because I feel like almost the opposite experience to you. Like I need to learn to be less vulnerable and less in my heart sometimes. It just in order to kind of actually, not when I'm sat with somebody or when I'm in those private moments of my life, but I think sometimes in order to make things move in this world, it would help me to be able to pull actually some of that back in. I'm curious, the pressure on men, and in this time of like the awakening feminine and the death of the patriarchy and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, the saying comes to mind when you just said it was like, trust everyone, but still lock your door. Right. I think there's an older saying that's something like tie up your horse, but everyone love everyone, but tie up your horse or something like that. Yeah, it's important to have that protection to yourself, especially your energetic self, because otherwise you can end up feeling incredibly exhausted when you're working with people. And that's about utilizing compassion rather than sympathy often. And the sympathy is just, taking on board fully what the person's experienced and being there side by side. And the compassion is accepting that, but then doing something about it so that the energy doesn't stay inside the body. Men, big topic.
Which I throw in just at the closing time.
But by the way, with all this stuff happening, what do you think about men? Holy God. Okay. Yes.
The alternative route was for you to share more about CBD and why it's useful and important.
No, people can Google that. That's fine. It's an objective product. They can look at that. It's good. Yeah. The way I see it is that life and history is a bit like a pendulum. We've been very kind of on this masculine side now for a very long time, which partly was reinforced by destability. So it's like the instability of the world and the fear of the world. And then, reality is like, if you, for instance, there's books about like the better angels of history and stuff, but like if you look at our actual society, it's kind of becoming more reliable despite us facing ecosystem collapse, which is a completely other story. And I think that the pendulum is going, okay, well, now for instance, in this country, we've got a healthcare system. We're not at war, or at least the war that is occurring and not directly affecting people here, which is both a bad and good thing. I'm totally against the wars that are happening. But what that then brings to mind is, hold on a second, and you've seen it across history. It's like, okay, now we have rights, right? So now you have individual rights and women's rights, and this kind of changing that's going throughout history. And I think the pendulum has been so heavy on the masculine and such a patriarchal setup that it's inevitable. It has to shift. It's just untenable. It's the same thing that's going on with the destruction of the planet. It's like that is not, might take a long time, but that is not possible to keep going. What's beautiful is that there's this blossoming now of going, yeah, culturally, that's something to address. And it's always been there and it's always been a problem. But finally, people going, let's put this at the top of the media. Let's really bring this out. And it's tragic that people just lost, like this lady just lost her life. But the sad fact of it is that, I think year on year, it's like 1,300 women disappear and lose their lives. And this has been going on for a long time. It's not an individual. This is a problem, systemic problem. And it's gross. Like the amount of attitudes that I've been seeing in male communities about women is sick. It's like, it's again another sickness, and it's another type of us versus them situation, which is similar to how people degrade other human beings because they then find it somehow makes them feel better, or makes them feel more important, which is the outcome of that is completely disgusting. Right now, men are saying, well, what does it mean to be a man, right? And this is really, really important because there hasn't been much of that questioning going on. There has been on the fringes, but as a society, they say, well, hold on, if we're not allowed to do that, what does it mean to be masculine, right? And it's like, firstly, there's this idea of toxic masculinity, which does exist. On top of that, there's also just men being assholes, or just anyone being an arsehole. And that behavior is just being an arsehole. It's not toxic masculinity. It's just they shouldn't be doing that. And there's a difference between the two. There are things that you shouldn't do. Then this is a masculine energy which has gone wrong. The masculine energy in particular that's gone wrong. I'm not going to talk about the people being assholes because that's just standard stuff. We should all be able to discern that with a bit of common knowledge, a bit of common sense. Just be like, shouldn't do that. When it comes down to the masculine energy being skewed, this is basically what's happened. Is a lot of the reasons that we are experiencing this is that women have their own thing. I'm not going to try and speak for women. They can do it themselves. Men have this issue whereby modern society has disenfranchised the use of huge amounts of that energy. So the idea that men can be violent and can go to war, it's true. And that energy is there regardless of whether that man goes to war or not. But there is not really an outlet for it, except for instance, like idea of sports. And again, it's not really that edgy, the sports, you know? So that energy exists. That's the survival energy, which existed because men were there to fight, and they fight other men and they fight animals or whatever, you know, that's how we survive. Then there's this whole thing about this dynamic between male and female, right? Which is quite well understood, especially in the East. Again, it's the yin yang idea. It's that people have their role and it's a balance, and there's no one better or worse than the other. And what's occurred is that there's culturally, we've somehow prioritized male ideas or male roles, which is bonkers, because again, it's the same thing with the way that the value system, especially in the West, is set up whereby extractive, which is again male energy, this idea of capitalism, the way that we're just taking things and using them, that's a male energy. It's not nurturing and growth. The idea we're destroying the planet, that's male. That's a male destruction, male destructive energy. So it's all feeding in some ways. This is how I see it. It's like this perpetuation of the male, wrong male, the way that men, and it's bled into society, and it's accepted and become the norm for how we do business and how we build products. And it's just awful. That's all based, it's skewed male energy. It's not right. It's not the way to do it. The most important thing is, if you really, really want to kind of look at anger and look at this kind of defensive thing that men, this violence that men carry inevitably, underneath it is a deep fear. And it's the same as people starting wars. They're afraid that if they don't start the war, they'll be taken over, or it's fear. It's fear-based. That other person, that other situation is going to affect me negatively. Thus, I'm going to be more aggressive, or so forth. This is in the male-female context. It's because men fear women. They've started to fear women. And it's because they're not taught how to become in touch with their emotions. It's all like a game. It's like they're taught this game of dance of what it means to be a man. It's like, you've got it all wrong. What it means to be a man is to be able to live with your heart so openly and so strongly. You can accept things like crisis without reacting. You can hold that energy. This idea that irrational women, it's like, it's completely bar me. It's just women need to express themselves in whatever way they want to do it, and that's fine. But then you've got this kind of identification that men put onto women, say, oh, she's crazy. I've heard that so many times. And it's like, no, you were being an arsehole and you're not able to accept that energy into you. You can't hold it because you were never taught that. There hasn't been that training, that teaching. Men need to be purposefully taught and educated about what it means to be strong. And it's not an outward aggressive force. It's about being in touch with your heart. And in some ways, it's about being vulnerable and being loving. Men need to be purposefully taught and educated about what it means to be strong. And it's not an outward aggressive force. It's about being in touch with your heart. And in some ways, it's about being vulnerable and being loving. I listened to your podcast, which you said, when you started this podcast, The Future is Beautiful, people were kind of saying, oh, beautiful. It's like, what's beautiful? Making a mockery of your wish. That is it. That's it. That's because the word beautiful has these connotations which aren't kind of in society valued. It's like beauty is an aesthetic. No, beauty is not an aesthetic. Beauty is a feeling. Beauty is what makes you alive, what makes it feel worth it to be alive. It's not an aesthetic. It's not something that looks like that. Beauty is more than skin. And it's the same thing. It's like what's valued in society and what's been allowed to be valued has actually been toxic masculine traits, whether it's extracting oil from the ground or terrible harassment that's occurring, which seems to be the norm. You know, like it's terrible. This is a sickness. And so this is all coming to get back to this period of education where we're not taught what it means to love. We're not taught practical use of what it means to be alive. We're taught a system which was trying to create us into valuable economic contributors to society, which means that our dehumanization of male and female has created this situation which is toxic for everybody, including the men. There's so many beautiful guys. They're just so real. They're so there, and they had to get there on their own often. It's so hard for them to say, I need help. It's not seemingly normal. And like me, I've needed help as a man, like I've needed help. I'm a very strong person and I needed it. And if I hadn't accepted that, it breaks you down. And unfortunately, that's the situation that society has kind of accepted as the norm. Men, it's a strong silent time. Like, oh, please, what is he, a stone? Yeah, what's it? Like, is that person just designed to kill? What is that about? The stereotypes that are created for masculine. What is it? The Marlboro man. Like, you got to think, like, what have been perpetuated, and a lot of it is also brutalism from World War II, generational brutalism. So you've got people who literally went to battle, men, and they just saw the worst things, and they had so much trauma, and they brought that back, and the trauma wasn't recognized, so they beat their kids. This happened in my family. Those kids had the generation above us, or they went through World War II, and then you've got this kind of affected society that came from war, and that was a man killing man war. That's predominantly what it was. It wasn't technologies particularly. It was more like the meat grinder, unfortunately. In the end, you got this trauma in society. And I think that the UK in particular has it because, again, in addition, the arrogance that came with colonialism. So you have the brutalism, the trauma, and the arrogance mixed together, which makes for a very toxic mix of what it means to be a man or an English man. It's fascinating and terrible at the same time. There's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that people want and need and are asking for. And I think in the last month or something, I've had invitations to 3 men's groups. It's popping up. It's happening. There is a sea change occurring. And that's something that, we should just embrace and learn and start to really work with. In some ways, it's nothing to do with women. It's really to do with men and changing men. And that's not to reduce the victimization. It's not to reduce the suffering. It's not women's problems. It's men's problems. Men's are the problem. They're the ones that need to change. So we need to focus those resources on changing men, the source of the problem, and the system that's created that.
Thank you. It's powerful to hear. Joe, this has been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you. It's interesting how all the themes interlink, everything's so interwoven. I'm reminded of the years that we both lived in London a decade ago and how I found you really unapproachable. I was quite intimidated. And to now kind of be in this space where, we're able to speak so openly and so deeply about so many things is a real, real joy. I wonder how you would like people to connect with you more from this conversation. Is there a website that we can send our friends to, or social media or something?
Yeah, I have a website. It's my name. I did it because I was applying for a project. So I created a kind of online CV, and it's not everything. And it's also kind of not quite me now, but it is something. And that's www.joe.oliver.com. And to just get in touch with me directly, just write Joe, Joe, at joe.oliver.com. That's the direct path. I get a lot of emails from people trying to sell me stuff, so probably don't do that because I will ignore it. And that's why my social medias, for instance, are all on private, because I have a lot of people adding me that I don't know. And I think that's a bit of a trouble with the internet, where people don't bother to have a conversation anymore. They just want something, which is quite obvious. And we haven't even touched on environment or sustainability, which is probably the core of all this problem anyway. So maybe we can do that another time. But it's been lovely. And thank you very much for the chance to speak the truth.
You're welcome. Yeah, we left a big gap there.
I did try and refer to ecosystem collapse, which...
Yeah, Yeah, it was mentioned. The words sustainability and climate were mentioned a few times. But at the heart of it, it's how can we live from our hearts and learn to break from the chains of extraction.
Yeah, definitely. And rebalance, getting into balance, so important, and revaluing what we think is important, which is basically to love, and that not to be weird, but just, I love you, Misha, and it doesn't have to be weird. That just is a good thing to do.
To love and to create beauty.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listeners' support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?